Today I have the pleasure of introducing Wendy Vaughn. Wendy is someone I met through someone who's very near and dear to me in the manufacturing industry, Art Biersbach. Wendy has a unique story that I think is really relevant to what we're dealing with today. She has quite a lot of sales background that I want to talk about, but I'd like to go back to the beginning. Wendy, you started off homeschooling your children, and that eventually led to your career. Can you bring me back to what that transition looked like and how that occurred?
Yeah, sure. Kind of an interesting transition, right? Although I frequently say that parenting is at least 50% sales. So yeah, it was kind of a situation that our family had gotten into where I actually had a small business for many years that I started, and I ran that for 16 years. And so that's actually where I got my feet wet in terms of sales. It was a service-based industry, weddings actually. I provided live music for weddings. Then we had kids and decided we wanted to move out of the desert. We were in the Phoenix area, and so I transitioned to full-time parent and homeschooled our children. We have three boys, and so I was in that role for basically 9 years. And then as life kind of deals you a deck, had to transition back into the workforce. And we were living in a very, and still are, in a very small, it's a ski resort town in Colorado. And so, the opportunity for a high paying gig is not readily available, but there was this opportunity within a corporate setting. Sales was the role, and it was actually healthcare IT, something I knew nothing about, either one of those, healthcare and IT, right? Foreign language. So the boss begrudgingly hired me because I'd had all this prior experience as a homeschool mom, right? And he made it very clear that that was kind of like, low bar. And so I jumped into this cubicle setting and put on a headset that I wore for 8 hours a day, and cauliflower ear and all that kind of thing. And the numbers that I had to hit, basically outbound calls, were 100 a day. And this was not a call center. It was actually a high touch relationship building type of sale. We were providing staffing resources within the healthcare industry. And so it required a lot of trust, because these people that we were replacing in the healthcare system, I mean, there was a lot riding on the shoulders, and it was a very competitive vertical in terms of there are a lot of staffing companies. And the firm that I was working for was very small. I was their second salesperson they hired. And they didn't really have a track record within the industry. So here I am, back into the workforce. Instead of running around chasing three little boys, I'm sitting in a cubicle 8-10 hours a day with this phone as the means to me making my income, and in an industry I knew nothing about. So long story short, I had to extract the knowledge and the formulas that I basically had dialed in the high touch, one-on-one, sitting across the table from somebody type of a sales experience, to condensing it into, okay, this detached, I couldn't even, where we have the luxury of seeing each other, Ben, as you know, a phone, you can't see anybody. And this was before robocalls. And so the decision makers would pick up the phone, and then they'd hear it's me. They go, that's the first response. Oh, and they wouldn't exactly hang up on me, but they wanted to. And so what I learned very quickly were some moves to just keep the door open, keep building the relationship, literally second by second. And I basically dialed in a formula that has served me very well. In fact, not to brag or boast, because it was really all about that formula. I ended up as top sales producer within 1 year, producing multi-millions in GP annually, year after year. And which was, it's all relative, right? What does that mean? I was about $1 million above my peer that was next in line.
Nice.
And the boss was always kind of scratching his head because, here I am, kind of this conservative person, sitting in the corner, kind of quiet, doing my thing. And around me were, your typical sales people, with that kind of mentality. And you don't have to be manipulative or pressure driven or anything like that. In fact, especially under this context of COVID that we're in right now, compassion and still seeing the person behind that invisible screen as another person that has, their same kind of struggles and daily stresses. And it's a matter of connecting on that human level, regardless of the fact it's a telephone.
So I forgot to mention to everyone that Wendy is a coach. She's a sales coach for organizations. That's what her expertise is. She actually has a podcast as well. But I know you saw this coming. One of the ideas of how you train others on these things that they need to overcome when they're trying to sell on the phone, can you share with us one of those ideas that can help us be more successful?
Yeah, of course. So, when the best thing, my best advice is always to put yourself in the other person's shoes and realize how, they're already in motion, doing what they're doing, when your call comes through, unless it's a scheduled call, of course. But even then, like our call right now, Ben, you're running 1,000,000 miles an hour. I'm running 1,000,000 miles an hour. Boom, our time has to kind of stop. And so one of the first things is just getting the mindset that the person on the other side of the phone is not up to speed with where you're at. And you've also probably caught them in the middle of a lot of things. And so one of the techniques, and I've had a lot of sales coaches argue with me on this, but I'm standing firm, is you have to acknowledge the fact that either one, you're an interruption, or two, that they've got lots going on. And, you want to be sensitive to that time. And just the sheer fact, it's amazing, because I call them leverage moves, simple moves that have big results, right? And it is just amazing how if you just acknowledge somebody, and we're talking, you've got like on a phone call, literally 2 seconds for somebody to either put up more of a resistance or start breaking down their resistance. And of course, there are many contexts for what you're, the purpose and kind of, lead up it to the call is. Like I said, if it's scheduled, if it's on somebody's calendar, that's one thing. If it's a cold call, and that's a totally different deal, right? And so that role that I was in the corporate sales role, those were all cold calls. Those were all cold calls. And it is definitely an art form, but that is a leverage move, is to just, hey, Bob, I realize that I'm catching you in the middle of an extremely busy afternoon. I'm going to be quick. The reason I'm calling, right then, I mean, you can't understand just thinking that, oh, that's simple. That line actually does something. Yeah, it really does. Just acknowledging, giving somebody kind of an acknowledgement that they're important, and then the second move that I'll give that is also a leverage move is once you, and again, it just depends on the context for what you're calling about. But usually there's an objection or initial resistance. I'm trying to broaden this out based on your listeners or viewers, so that it's relative and relevant. But for instance, and maybe you can just draw your own similarity here. So my role was in healthcare IT staffing. And so I would call, and these people are project managers, and they all had vendors they were already working with. And so that was their first line of objection was, I already have somebody I'm working with, to try to shut the call down. So right away, I'd say, I realize you no doubt have people you're already working with. And just that simple move, they're like, uh-huh. I took that objection away from them. So those are two quick and simple leveraged moves that really allow the conversation to begin to unfold, allow you to take that next step. It's all about thinking about them and what's important for them that will keep the conversation going and engaging.
Wendy, that's wonderful. I told you before we started this call that I actually received some hypnosis a couple days ago because of my struggles I'm having with making those phone calls. And you hit on it perfectly well. And I loved it. It's timely. I needed to hear it, that for me to be able to come in and help remove those objections at the beginning of the phone call is going to make the comfort level that much better, because I do get sick to my stomach that I'm interrupting people. And as you said, you are interrupting people, but there are techniques that you can use. And I am a very much down in the weeds type of person. The techniques you shared are right on. They're perfect. So thank you so much for that, Wendy. And
Sure.
Could you tell me a little bit about your podcast? How do I find out more about your podcast?
Yeah, so this was kind of a moment of inspiration, right? I'm a sales coach, and obviously my heart and soul is behind helping other people get great at selling, so that they can get clients, basically. That's the end result, so that they can have a thriving business. Well, in talking with a lot of business owners and mainly entrepreneurs, some are, struggling, to put it lightly, struggling. And, that spark of a vision that was the initial catalyst has become dampened and maybe buried. And so the point of the podcast is called the Selling Made Easy Show. And the point of it is to showcase and feature another entrepreneur, a guest entrepreneur, who shares their journey, their business journey. What was the tipping point that prompted them to launch into business for themselves? And what have been some of the challenges that they've faced, and how have they solved those challenges? So it's really, two-pronged. It's inspirational through the eyes of another entrepreneur who's out there blazing their own trail, like I say, and tapping into their zone of genius to make an impact against the odds that keep coming up. Because as an entrepreneur or a leader, there's always unknown things that keep flying in our face. And it's a matter of keeping the vision, keeping your eyes set on the target. And so that's one fold. The other is to, selling, it can be a difficult thing, a challenge for people. There can be a lot of fear and anxiety that comes up when it comes to talking about the offer and, this is what it costs to work with me. And so the other prong to this is that I ask my guests to share any challenges that they're having with their sales process, and I provide some on-the-spot sales coaching to help solve that. So it allows our listeners to also ideally be able to solve some of their problems or get information to solve something that might come up. So those are the 2 points. And then obviously the guest can showcase, their expertise and how they're really making a difference. And that gets people excited about working with them.
Great. Wendy, wonderful. Well, I'm looking forward to listening to the Selling Made Easy show, and it sure is nice that Art introduced us. Thank you so much for your time today.
All right. Thank you so much, Ben. It's been my pleasure.